Hello, this is Unexplained America, and I'm your host, Lisa. Today's episode is on the 1990 I-75 deadly accident caused by a dense, mysterious fog in Tennessee. Before we get started, just a little bit of business. You can find me on all the social medias, and all of that is linked in our show notes, so check out the show notes. Also, I do have a live event at the U.S. Marshals Museum this month. It's the 22nd in Fort Smith, Arkansas. So if you wish to attend, want tickets, you can email me at unexplainedarkansas@gmail.com. That is also in the show notes, and I will be posting this information on, like I have posted, but I will continue to post on the social medias like Facebook, Instagram. You will see posts about this. So please, on this episode, leave a review, a 5-star rating, and a comment. Subscribe and follow as well. So we're going to get started. And this is horrible. It's a sad episode. It happened, in the 90s, in 1990, but it happened like a few weeks before Christmas. So it's just awful. So yes. But on December 11th, 1990, at around 9:10 a.m. in the morning, a semi-tractor trailer traveling southbound, and this was on I-75, it would begin to slow down due to some dense fog. The tractor trailer behind would actually, unfortunately, not see this first tractor trailer slow down and would plow into him, setting off a chain reaction, leaving 12 persons dead and 42 injured. And just we're talking 100 cars involved. So we're going to start at the beginning, though. So the section of highway involved in this crash in 1990 officially opened to traffic December 24th of 1973. And literally by March 9th of 74, so we're talking not even 4 months, this is just like 3 months or so, there was a multi-car collision during a heavy fog that involves 18 vehicles. 3 people were killed and 10 injured. So this is happening like right off the bat of this section of the interstate being opened. Over the following 5 years, there would be 5 more multi-vehicle crashes on this stretch. One of which was literally like April 19th, 1974. So we're saying March to April, 9 vehicles were involved in this accident, 9 injured. And then in June, like June 12th, 1976, so a couple years later, 4 cars involved. Luckily, everybody was good. Nobody died or anything. Now, December 16th of 1977, there were 14 cars involved, and there were 7 injured. Yes. So this was just horrific. And then we have on November 5th, 1978, like a year later, 62 cars involved in an accident and 46 injured. Now, 0 were killed, and that is a blessing. However, December 16th, 1977, 14 more cars, 7 injuries. So this is continuous. This is a pattern. Now, they do see a little bit of a break, but on April 15th, and this is, April 15th, 1979, you have 18 cars involved in another accident here, and 3 people would be killed. So yes, horrible, horrible situation. So these collisions were investigated at this time, especially after this 1979 collision. They were investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board, which concluded to differing reaction to the drivers during the fog. So basically they blamed it on the drivers. So all of these accidents were attributed to a dense fog in the area that came about kind of quickly, making visibility 0. Now in 1979, family members of these people in these accidents did file a lawsuit, and they actually filed it against a paper mill company called Bowater Paper Mill, which was a manufacturing company located about 3 miles from the crash site. So people felt like the paper mill and I guess the water vapor, and we'll get way into this, but they felt like the Bowater, manufacturer there contributed to the dense fog. Bowater denied any responsibility. They blamed just natural, fog as the cause of the accidents. However, the paper mill, and this is in 1979, so several years before what we're talking about, they settle out of court with these families. It's an undisclosed figure. So, yes, just keep that on your mind. So, additionally, in 1979, so in January of 1979, the Tennessee Department of Transportation, so they asked the University of Tennessee to conduct a study regarding the fog situation in that area of I-75 that is obviously an issue. Again, ever since it opened, they've continually had issues there. So they do mention that there are settling ponds. These are related to the Bowater plant. So they mentioned that could have, there's ponds there. They're causing, water vapor condensation. So those were possible contributors to the fog in the area. But basically, they came back and stated further research really needed to confirm. And they advised for the state to look into this research, but the research was going to be like $100,000 just for a research study on the Bowater's contribution to the fog. So the state did not do the study, like they canceled it at many people's, dismay. They were super upset about the situation. So Bowater themselves commissioned a study in 1979 in an effort to counter the University of Tennessee study. However, their study instead just confirmed that Bowater's emissions did contribute to the fog, but did not state to what extent. There was also a study in 1981 by the U.S. Department of Energy that concluded Bowater's presence in the area did make the dense fog, in places about 3 times as great as it would normally be under just a normal amount of naturally caused fog. So you have, as you can see, you have a pattern of accidents related to fog, and then you have these studies because of course the families, they want answers. Yeah, so they want something done. So with all of these accidents and public outcry, the state decides to install dual warning signs. So by 1980, there were signs that read extreme dense fog for the next 5 miles. So this is what they decided to do. Now, they put these signs up along the north and southbound lanes in this stretch that was having the accidents. Now, if the fog was detected, it was said that these lights would flash on these signs, like the warning lights would flash. The state also began sending state troopers to the area, specifically when there was fog going on. They would place them at each end of the fog zone to ensure motorists were actually slowing down. Okay, this is what they did. So, and this was in 1980. So for the next 10 years, this solution worked. There weren't any large multi-car accidents like what had been seen between 1974 and 1979. So in this section of the highway, at least, there was no accidents. So that's what they wanted. Now, to kind of describe this area a little bit of the highway, so this stretch of I-75 consisted of about actually 10 miles in between the larger cities in Tennessee of Chattanooga and Knoxville. Now, this section was in 2 different counties, actually. It was in a Bradley County there and McMinn counties in Tennessee. And this section of highway was also kind of the lowest valley between the Cumberland Mountains and the Appalachians. So it was a very low-lying land. And this area was kind of near this bridge that ran over the Hiwassee River. So it was low-lying. It was very near this Hiwassee River going on. And of course, with the river, you then have the tributaries. You have other ponds and lakes created by this. So you have some low-lying land, and then you have this water. So geographically, the crash site also is closest to the Tennessee town of Calhoun. So this would actually be called the Calhoun crash as well by like locals and part, in different studies and different articles. So the town of Calhoun is close by. So now 10 years after the safety precautions were added, so there's kind of a sense of complacency with these signs. In fact, by 1990, at the time of this accident, so one of those fog warning lights no longer even worked. Like, it no longer lit up. It didn't do anything. The other one literally blinked all the time. So travelers typically, especially local traffic or people that had been through that area, numerous times, like truckers, they're kind of used to the road. I mean, I'm sure they're coming through there over and over. They've got certain paths that they're taking. So there was just kind of really the warning so-called signs were really not there anymore. I mean, basically they were just like not working, not heated, not anything. Now, it did say the presence of the state patrol had kind of lowered by this time. Not to say it wasn't there. The highway patrol was, on the highways anyway, but it just wasn't specifically there like it had been in the beginning, as you can imagine how that goes. So, and especially, again, after 10 years of zero incidences, I'm sure they thought, oh, well, this is, this issue is not really an issue anymore. It's been 10 years since the last major accident. Now, at 5:30 a.m. on December 10th of 1990, a Tennessee State Highway trooper conducts a routine fog check near Calhoun. And the trooper found zero fog. Like, they didn't see any issues. This was 5:30 a.m. Yeah, I guess it was probably still a little dark. No issues. While commuting to work by 8:15, another highway patrol captain drove through the same area and noticed a light fog, but nothing that caused him any type of visibility issue. Now, I will say, just FYI, the temperature range in that time period was going from like 30 degrees at night, like 32 degrees at night, and getting up to 60 degrees during the day. So there's some movement going on. There's quite a big swing temperature-wise, and that happens where I live too. It's just that time of year. It's just, it's crazy. It's weird to think of a 30-degree swing, but that's what was happening. By 9 a.m., motorists were noticing the light fog becoming very dense, and it was dropping their visibility down to 10 feet or less. So this was happening in both north and southbound lanes, and this is around 4 miles to the south of the accident site. So they were noticing a fog by 9 a.m., and it was pretty dense. So by 9:10 a.m., that initial semi-tractor trailer truck that I mentioned, it's a 1990 Freightliner. So it is in the southbound lane in that Calhoun area we mentioned. And it is near an overpass where the State Route 163 meets the Interstate 75 there. So this truck driver, he slows down. He is immediately hit with this dense fog. He slows down to 25 miles per hour. He is immediately hit from behind by a semi-tractor trailer that was going around 35 to 40 miles per hour. And this truck was transporting dicumyl peroxide in portable tanks. Extremely flammable, by the way. So these two drivers, upon this collision, this just, came in from the back, obviously not going ridiculously fast, but fast enough to have, this collision. They get out of the trucks. They are uninjured, okay? And they are looking at the trucks, just assessing the damage. They're assessing the situation. They're not, hurt. However, within 3 minutes of this, a 1991 Oldsmobile Sedan collides with the second truck carrying the peroxide. And right behind them crashes another semi-tractor trailer truck. The Oldsmobile is immediately crushed and immediately kills the driver and passenger in that car. There is a huge explosion, like just a huge, I can't even imagine. The fire breaks out, engulfs 3 of the vehicles right away. And there's just no way to imagine the sound. I mean, you've got just these huge, I mean, even a small situation with a vehicle, you know how loud that sounds? This was deafening. This was horrific. And you've got the smells. You have, people would recall like the smell of the smoke, and then you have the noxious gas smell, and then you have the burning flesh, like the horrible. And again, just all those sounds as well. And this is zero visibility already. Like, this is a dense fog, and they'll describe, and we'll get into this, like zero visibility. You cannot see through this fog. I can't even imagine the horribleness, like right there, just knowing someone's died, just right in front of your eyes. And they describe this fog like a blanket, like a white blanket pulled over their eyes. This is like some horror movie. Like, ugh. I don't know if you guys have seen the fog, but ugh. Like, that's what I imagine, I guess. But I just can't even believe this. But zero visibility, zero visibility. On top of this horrific scene unfolding on the southbound side, so now it's 9:15, and on the northbound side of the highway, a 1987 Honda Sedan has slowed down due to the fog. Right then, they are hit from behind by a 1987 Ford Escort. And then behind the Escort comes a 1982 Toyota pickup. And then they're hit by a 1990 two-door Pontiac. And then in 1983, Oldsmobile Delta hits the Pontiac. So currently, this side at around, right after the other side, this one's now 5 cars deep. Now, prayerfully, these vehicles were not going maximum speeds, and there were 0 fatalities or fires in this cluster. Now, at the same time, at 9:15, so right behind, this is just imagine this is boom, boom, boom. So at 9:15, a driver in the southbound lane, they see the collision of the semi-tractor trailers that exploded. And luckily, they have a radio in their vehicle. So they do radio in the accident to the McMinn County Emergency Communications, which they get with the Bradley County agencies. And then they set in place, they have like a disaster plan. So they notify the disaster plan agency. And then they have emergency fire and rescue people are notified. So by 9:30, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, they are notified, and they coordinate with the federal, state, and local agencies over all of this. So due to the hazardous materials, like every single agency imaginable is contacted. In all, that day, there will be 33 different departments phoned in to assist, and they do jump into action right away. Now, within this window, I mean, we're talking very small, between 9:15, 9:30, 9:45. So there will be a total collisions in the southbound lane of 80 vehicles. And they're in different collision clusters. So obviously you kind of saw, you started with like 5 vehicles. Well, they just kept coming. It was explosions and fires just everywhere. And this whole situation is like over like a half a mile, like to a mile. I've seen kind of different, reports, but a half a mile to a mile long debris chain of just people and crushed vehicles. and fires and just, like I said, the burning flesh, the zero visibility. They can't see at all. It's just, the scene is described as a war zone. A war zone. Like nothing you can imagine. And I have posted like my thumbnail on this. I will post pictures, but it's absolutely gut-wrenching. I mean, it looks like utter chaos. And again, and then add on, you do have the different departments. So the northbound lane would end up with around 27 or so vehicles. So this brings the total in the whole scene over 100 cars involved. Now, different articles state different things. Some say 99, but according to the National Transportation Safety Board report, it was 107. It was 27 plus 80. So it's just unimaginable. And again, these are different cluster accidents, but it was just a chain reaction. It was like one car hits the next car, hits the next car, and just the utter just chaos and horribleness, and just the metal and the glass and the smoke. It's just impossible to imagine. Now, at this point in 1990, this accident would be the largest vehicle-wise accident until 2002. Okay, in 2002 in LA, there were 216 cars involved in one accident site. So in 1990, it became the largest site, and it stayed that way for 12 years. It's insane to imagine. So both sides of the highway, again, would have the crash sites extending at minimum half a mile to a mile. So by 9:32 a.m., the Tennessee Highway, they closed down both lanes. And it said within 40 minutes of the crash, they actually had the injured, which we'll talk about that, they were taken to nearby hospitals. And they had in towns like Cleveland, Athens, Chattanooga, and Knoxville. So within 40 minutes, they have the injured out. Now, what they have to do, and I will say, there were many, many people that miraculously come out of the accident completely unscathed. I mean, zero, like just some bruising or whatever. So these people, and of course they have no car. I mean, they have no car though. I mean, these cars are just destroyed. So these people are taken like by bus to a local school. So they're just kind of getting them out of this situation, because you have chemicals, you have fire, you have you have dead body, you have death, fire, just all of these horrific things, going on. They've got to get these people out of there so that they can work, on the crash site. At this site, specifically on the southbound, there would be so much fire and the chemicals, they would literally burn through the asphalt. So the southbound lane, I mean, it was done. It was just done. Now by 2 p.m., the northbound lane is reopened, but the southbound lane was totally destroyed. Workers were literally working still into the night on victims on the southbound side. Just on victims. We're not even talking the road at this point. So they're just working on getting victims out of the car debris. And this would go on. They would stop at midnight and go on into the morning. Survivors would recount their experiences. A Reverend Richard Rabideau from Michigan, he was driving through and he came upon the scene. He said there were people screaming, and then there was bangs and boom, and then another bit, like described as just boom, boom. And he said the crashing went on for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Like, again, there are no words for this. This is just devastation. A truck driver named David Bloomer, he was 31 years old. He was from Columbia, Missouri. So he was able to get out of his truck and then help a woman and a baby out of their car. And right as he handed over the baby to the woman, a semi truck was looming down on them, like coming at them. He was able to run away, just getting nicked by the truck. The truck threw him 30 feet in the air just by nicking him. Luckily, David was, just bruised and didn't have to be hospitalized. He just came away with bruises, but thrown 30 feet. 30 feet. That's wild. It's just wild. So one survivor, a man named William Johnson from Kingpin, Tennessee, he states that 1 minute it was literally sunny. The next minute it was like a sheet was in front of his eyes, like as in the fog. He's describing the fog just like a sheet. And again, someone else, was like, they described it as a blanket coming across their windshield. It was that thick, that thick. I'll tell you the truth. I don't like fog. I don't like to drive through fog. My road is kind of curvy, windy, and it gets foggy. And I'm used to it. I live on this road, but it's still, and it is not even, I wouldn't even describe it as a blanket over my windshield. That is just, that for me is just very nerve-wracking. It's almost like, to me, a suffocation. I don't like that at all. So emergency personnel worked, again, through the whole day, pulling bodies out of what is left of the wreckage. And again, they're having to use, we always hear of the jaws of life. I mean, these vehicles, a lot of metal intertwined. So at first, even that day or even into the next day, they thought that they had actually 15 people that had died in the crash. They thought they had that many. They could not tell. Like, that's how bad these bodies were, that they could not tell. It turns out that there were 12 actual bodies, but they would not be able to tell that. So 4 of the 12 were physically actually, like, you could distinguish they were bodies. We're talking 4 out of those 12. This means 8 of those bodies were so badly burned and it took days for them to figure out who they were. And of course, this is, they describe this as really difficult because, if a plane crash happens, there is a passenger list. There is everyone on board. So in this case, they didn't have a victim list to go by. They had no clue. So when this happens, of course, people are hearing about it and they're like, oh, they had 600 people phone in looking for their relatives or seeing if their loved one was in this wreck. Because they didn't know. I mean, they didn't, they were just, they just knew that their loved one was driving and that they would be in this area. So, of course, all these people are panicked, absolute panic. I can't even imagine. And again, this is, December 10th. This is, just a few days before, 15 days before Christmas. It's just absolutely awful, absolutely heart-wrenching. So they were asking the families that knew that they would have loved ones involved. They were having to ask the families for like descriptions of jewelry, dental work, like fillings, like, maybe such and such had a gold tooth or had certain fillings. They had to know distinguishing characteristics because, again, you had 8 people that they could not recognize them at all. So the final 12th victim would actually not be identified until Monday the 17th, a full week later. And it was by a forensic pathologist from the University of Tennessee. So again, this is the reality of what they faced. This is how bad this situation was. And we'll kind of get into this. I don't want to be too morbid, but just to kind of outline, the reality. So, and again, just how badly these people were burned and not recognizable. So I couldn't find, obviously, a definitive list anywhere of the 12 victims, like name-wise. But in a report, like part of the National Transportation Safety Board's report findings, and these would come out in 1992. So they outline some information and the horrific facts of the situation and the fatalities. So in that 1991 Oldsmobile, and of course we spoke of that distinctly, it was in the southbound lane. There was a man and a woman. They were both in their late 60s. They were both wearing their seatbelts. The male, he had burns over 90% of his body. And it said that the female's body was described as incinerated. Remember, these were the first victims in the whole thing. In a 1960 GMC motorhome in the southbound lane, 3 people were in the motorhome, but the only fatality was a male, 47 years old. 90% of his body was burned. What was said to be his wife and child, so his wife ended up with burns to her feet, and their son had like fracturing in his vertebrae. They were actually pulled out of the vehicle by bystanders. So they sadly just could not get to the husband. A 1984 Chevrolet pickup had a 41-year-old female. She was incinerated. She was by herself in the vehicle. A 1980 tractor trailer, truck trailer, it was a 52-year-old male. He was incinerated, and he was in the truck by himself. A 1984 Lincoln Town Car, there was a 60-year-old male. He was by himself, and he was listed as incinerated. A 1988 Volvo semi-tractor trailer, this was a 30-year-old male. He was incinerated. We will mention him because actually his name is Craig Piper, and we'll mention why we know this, okay? There is a 1985 Chevrolet Silverado pickup with a 52-year-old female. She dies from a crushed shoulder, arm. She had abdominal hemorrhaging, and she fractured both right and left legs. I mean, absolutely awful. A 1989 Dodge Shadow driven by a 58-year-old female. She had abdominal hemorrhage and fractured left ribs. A 1982 Toyota was a 50-year-old female. Both of her legs were amputated. She had a contusion to her chest and abdominal wall, and she had an 11-year-old passenger that was okay. She was injured, but she was okay. And this was on the northbound side. So there was only one fatality on this northbound side. The other fatalities did happen on the southbound side. A 1989 Chevrolet Astro van, a 33-year-old woman, she died of a fractured neck. And then a 1985 Freightliner carrying a 38-year-old male was incinerated. So I did find an article from a Michigan paper that said that this male was 38 years old, so I was able to look at the age and such. So this man's name was Alan Day, and he did drive a truck. He was a truck driver, and he was from the Howell area of Michigan. So again, you had these horrific deaths, and this is the way that they died. And the majority, of course, died by incineration, meaning the fire. So now you still had 42 people that were injured. Their injuries were everything from abrasions, bruises. They had hips dislocated. They had lung contusions. One person had a myocardial contusion. There were concussions, scalp lacerations, femoral fractures, facial lacerations, fractures of the tibias. Like one person had an amputation of their left little finger and ring finger. So they lost 2 fingers. That was it. That was their only injury. And then some people literally walked away completely unscathed. And again, we had over 100 vehicles in this accident. So, I mean, it's just like, it's just wild. It's just, I don't know, mind boggling here. So, another person I know definitively, I mentioned above, was Craig Piper. So, he was a 30-year-old truck driver, and he was driving home. He was actually coming home to be with his mother for Christmas. So he was burned to death, and Craig's mother, Evelyn. So the reason why I know his name, I could connect the dots between his age and such. So his mother wanted answers. I mean, of course, all of these victims' families and survivors, this is horrendous. They're like, what? And of course, I'm sorry, it would have been on their minds. 1979, as this came about, everybody would have been pointing that finger to 1979. Well, Evelyn hires an attorney named Doug Fees to look into this fog situation. Like, how was this fog so dense? Why was it in? What were how did it happen? Why did it happen? What were the warnings? Like, she just wanted answers. Her son was 30. So I will say within a day of this accident, I was looking, me, I'm looking in the newspaper articles. They are immediately mentioning the Bowater paper plant. Immediately they're mentioning, did the plant have anything to do with this fog situation? This, because of 1979. This has already been, we've already gone down this road. This is in the forefront of minds. And I'm sure in Evelyn's mind, Doug Fee's mind, like, they're wondering, was this a natural fog? There is natural fog in this area. But was this a natural fog? Or who's to blame? Or what's to blame? So, bottom line, these families wanted answers. How is this fog? Like, how was it sunny one minute and then this absolute horrendous fog the next? 12 people lose their lives, like, just within, 2 weeks of Christmas. Absolute tragedy. So Doug Fees, on top of being an attorney, he is also educated as an engineer. And he wanted to understand, okay, what caused this fog? What was the issue? Why we know it's common in this area with the river and the valley and whatever, but this fog that morning was extremely severe, like extreme. It was extreme fog. Fog, by definition, is a thick cloud of tiny water droplets suspended in the atmosphere at or near the Earth's surface, which obstructs or restricts visibility. Yes. So, and it sometimes it's described as a mist, or but it's reducing visibility there. So fog can be an issue, obviously, when there's so much water in the air. So there's too much water for the atmosphere to naturally absorb quickly. And again, we knew this kind of fog was happening. It was described by victims. It was extremely dense and thick. And in the time of the accident, the river fog was described as small. So people are, they're seeing this river fog and they're like, yeah, it's not that foggy on the actual river, not that foggy. Okay. So again, the Bowater paper mill facility, it's manufacturing, like in its manufacturing process, it is producing a fog-like emission. And the paper mill is it was 3 miles to the east of this I-75 where this accident happened. And it had been in operation since the 1950s, the plant had. The plant was actually, and especially at that time, the largest producer of newsprint in North America, in all of North America at that time. In the emissions, the plant releases large quantities of water vapor into the atmosphere, and it's emitting 24 hours a day when in production. So all the time, of course, it's a plant, it's producing. So initially, like way back in that 1979, so a man named Wayne Davis at the University of Tennessee, so he was the one that had advised the state to get a more detailed study after those awful crashes that were happening in the 70s. And like we mentioned, the state didn't do that. Now, Doug Fees heard about a scientist who was using computers to track weather conditions and pollutants and its effect on the environment. So Fees hires a Dr. Alan Eschenroder, and he was a civil engineer from Harvard, and he also had his own risk management firm. So Dr. Eschenroder collected data and weather information. He went and collected data from like the closest airports, and there was a nuclear power plant close by. So he's collecting like all this data about what is going on, because obviously, okay, is this normal, quote unquote? Was this a natural occurrence? Like, what was going on at this time? And all of these places were within around a mile of the crash site. So all the weather analysis of the day actually reflected very few clouds, light wind. And now we mentioned how now the temperature is swinging. It's swinging from 32 being the low to 60 degrees at the highest, okay? And sometimes, like, you can get evidently, and they kind of knew this, the scientists knew this, you can get an inversion from this type of swing. And basically, it's where a layer of warmer air is situated above a layer of cooler air. So that's what an inversion is. And it is, of course, just a natural phenomenon based on those different, airs hitting. So these inversions can cause fog. And again, fog can be natural. And again, in the area, you had the natural fog of the water vapor coming off the river, lakes, and ponds. Like this had been happening. Now, further analysis collected from a helicopter pilot, actually. So a pilot was kind of, around that day, he was flying around. He noted a mushroom-shaped cloud coming from the Bowater paper mill's smokestacks that day. So basically, they notated that Bowater's production was heavy on the day of this crash. So it was definitely, producing and emitting a lot of water vapor into the air. So Dr. Eschenroder, he calculated the evaporation rate on the natural bodies of water in the area of the crash as only emitting about 392 gallons per day, period. Like barely enough to produce a light fog. Now, Dr. Eschenroder also looked at the same evaporation rate of the Bowater plant and what they emit via their smokestack. And also, they do have these wastewater ponds as well, which were used to clean their industrial waste from the mill. So they do have these ponds on site. So these ponds actually have fans in them propelling water up in the air. And most of the water just comes back down, but some of it does drift. It has a drift amount, and so it doesn't come back in. So Dr. Eschenroder, he calculates like the drift of these water emissions plus the smokestack emissions. So they, just from the Bowater plant, they are emitting, at a rate of 10 million gallons per day. 10 million, like far greater amount than 392 gallons, right? Like by a lot, like a lot. So in his analysis, this difference would definitely create some serious fog. He then looked at the wind patterns of that day and also calculated that the fog from the plant could very well be carried the 3 miles to the crash spot. So they were looking at how much, what the evaporation rate is. Would it be causing fog? Could that fog actually, be pushed wind-wise, drift down to this crash site? His theory is yes. So Dr. Eschenroder is saying, yes, the Bowater plant would be the quote-unquote cause of this dense fog. Now, Doug Fees, utilizing this scientific study from Dr. Eschenroder, he files a civil lawsuit on behalf of not just Evelyn Piper, but also a total of 30 victims from the crash. So 30 of them are involved in this lawsuit. Bowater hires their own specialist to look at things, a Dr. George McVille. He's a meteorologist from Denver. So his study concludes that the bow water plant contributes less than 1% of the water vapor. So he felt like it would not have caused such a dense fog. He noted that the fog was made up of the mixing of air at the different altitudes. After the sun came up, the fog was produced by this air heating up at the ground level. So that was Dr. McVell's situation here. So now, before the trial even happened or came about, the court actually, they looked at, of course, people would have known about the 1979 study. So the court pulled up the 1979 study that the bow water plant themselves had done. And again, yeah, it's kind of telling. So the firm was an environmental research and technology firm that did that 1979 study, and it showed evidence suggesting bow water contributed to the local vapor flexing and fogging issues in the Calhoun area. The bow water company never took full responsibility for this fog, but because of all this, they did settle out of court for $10 million in 1994, which is huge amount of money in that time period. So, yes, again, not taking responsibility, but they did settle their case. So now the National Transportation Safety Board, so they issue their report, which is about 83 pages. They issue on September 28th of 1992. And now they looked at the bow water facility. They also looked at an Olin facility, which is a chemical plant, also right there in the area near the crash. And their findings were related to the fog, definitely. And they stated the fog warnings did not stop or deter drivers, nor would having patrol cars. They did instruct that other states, if people were driving or coming upon an area known to have safety issues, that specific speeds are stated. So, kind of to give an example, let's just say it's pretty curvy, windy here. So, let's just say you see a curve sign. They're telling you in advance, okay, there's a curve. You need to go 35 miles per hour around this curve. So that's what the National Safety Board is trying to say, that basically they put up these fog warnings, but they didn't even tell people, okay, because, go to 25 miles per hour, go to, whatever. So you had differing speeds. You had people, they weren't looking at it. And then on the other hand, they're saying, okay, well, people really didn't look at the speed or the signs anyway. So that's of interest. So nonetheless, so the National Safety Board doesn't actually advise on how, slow to advise drivers on the dense fog situation, but they're saying you need to advise them. So earlier we mentioned some of the crashers, the crashes came about because the motorists dropped to 25 miles per hour or less, but some were still going 40 or more. And that was the issue. And of course there's zero visibility. So we discussed that there was legal action taken against Bellwater, and they did settle for $10 million out of court. Well, there were additional lawsuits involved against the actual Tennessee Department of Transportation. So they would actually settle out of court as well for around $800,000, and due to negligence for the conditions of the area. So since this horrible situation, so Tennessee, the state, the highway department, so they did, introduce several safety measures along this stretch of highway between mileposts 31 and 39. They designated this as fog advisory zone or fog area, which contains large warning signs on both sides of the road in both directions to warn motorists. Most of the roadways were restriped in this area, lots of extra paint, markings, reflectors, lots of extra safety, items right from the go. This is right after 1990. In 1993, it said the state paid for a very high-tech computerized fog detection system and spent $4.5 million on it. Then in 2006, they upgraded the system. So in cases where the fog is detected, the system would advise motorists to lower to speeds of 50 miles per hour or 35 miles per hour. So this system would automatically okay, drop to this speed or drop to that speed. There's been so many advancements, obviously since 1990 to the highway safety period. There is a website in Tennessee that will show you all the accidents. It'll show you the reasons, the locations, and I will attach, like in our show notes, I will kind of share that link. I live in Arkansas. We have the same thing. Statistically, fatalities occur when people do not wear a seatbelt, and it's due to speed, actually drug consumption, and distracted driving. So, everyone remain safe and vigilant. And if you do happen to enter like a fog zone, like be safe. Just be as safe as you possibly can. Like it's scary, especially at night. And it seems to happen at night or in the actual early morning hours. So I can't imagine, like, you're driving along and everything's sunny, then all of a sudden this dense blanket like fog. I mean, that is definitely unexpected, unexplained, like, ooh. Yeah, wild and horrible. So, and just think of these poor families. So, again, very sad case. We definitely feel for these families and their loss, and just kiss your loved ones. And thank you guys for listening, and love you. Bye.